We have now examined most of the Vedic passages which directly show that the polar or the circumpolar characteristics determined in earlier videos were known by tradition to the Vedic bards. Starting with the tradition about the night of the gods, or a day and night of 6 months each, we found that it could be traced back to the Indo-Iranian, if not to the Indo-Germanic period. A close examination of the dawn hymns in Rig Veda next disclosed the fact that Ushas, or the deity presiding over the dawn, is often addressed in the plural number in Vedic hymns, and that this could be accounted for only by the supposition that the Vedic dawns were closely connected band of mini-dawns, a supposition which was found to be fully borne out by express passages in the Vedic literature, stating in unambiguous terms that the Vedic dawns were 30 in number, and that in ancient times a period of several days elapsed between the first appearance of light on the horizon and the rising of the sun. We have also found that the dawn is expressly described in Rig Veda as moving around like a wheel, a characteristic which is true only in the case of the polar dawn. These facts sufficiently prove the acquaintance of the Vedic bards with the physical phenomenon witnessable only in the Arctic regions. But to make the matter more certain, we have in the last few videos quoted and discussed Vedic passages which go to prove the long Arctic nights and the corresponding long days of varying duration, as well as a year of 10 months or 5 seasons, were equally known to the poets of the Rig Veda. An examination of the ancient sacrificial system, and especially the annual satras and night sacrifices, further showed that in old times yearly sacrificial sessions did not last for 12 months, as at present, but were completed in 9 or 10 months, and the 100-night sacrifices were, at the time, really performed as their name indicated, during the darkness of the long night. The legends of Durgatama's and Aditi's sons, the tradition about the sacrificial sessions of the Navagvas and the Dashagvas, also pointed to the same conclusion. Our case does not, therefore, depend on isolated fact here and isolated fact there. We've seen the half-year-long day and night, the long dawn with its revolving splendors, the long continuous night matched by the corresponding long day, and associated with a succession of ordinary days and nights of varying lengths, and the total annual period of sunshine of less than 12 months, are the principal peculiar characteristics of the polar or circumpolar calendar. When express passages are found in the Vedas, the oldest record of the early Aryan thoughts and sentiments, showing that each and every one of these characteristics was known to the Vedic bards, who themselves lived in a region where the year was made up of 360 or 365 days, one is irresistibly led to the conclusion that the poets of Rig Veda must have known these facts by tradition, and that their ancestors must have lived in regions where such phenomena were possible. It is not to be expected that evidence on each and every one of these points will be equally conclusive, especially as we're dealing with facts which existed thousands of years ago. But if we bear in mind that the facts are astronomically connected in such a way that if one of them is firmly established, all the others follow from it as a matter of course, the cumulative effect of the evidence discussed in previous videos cannot fail to be convincing. It is true that many of the passages quoted in support of the Arctic theory are interpreted in the way that we have done for the first time, but we have already pointed out that this is due to the fact that the real key to the interpretations of these passages was discovered only in the last 30 or 40 years at the turn of the 19th century. Yeska and Sayana know nothing definite about the circumpolar or the Arctic regions. When a Vedic passage was found not to yield a sense intelligible to them, they either contented themselves with barely explaining the verbal texture of the passage, or distorted it to suit their own ideas. Western scholars have corrected some of these mistakes, but as the possibility of an Arctic home in pre-glacial times was not admitted some years back, the most explicit references, whether in the Avesta or Rig Veda, to a primeval home in the extreme north, have been either altogether ignored or somehow or other explained away, even by Western scholars. Many of the passages cited fall in this class, but we trust that if interpretations are examined without any bias and in the light of the latest scientific researches, they will be found to be far more natural and simple than those in vogue at present. In some cases, no new interpretations were, however, necessary. The passages have been correctly interpreted, but in the absence of the true key of their meaning, their real import was either altogether missed or but perfectly understood. In such cases, we have had to exhibit the passages in their true light or colors, giving in each case reasons for doing the same. This has sometimes rendered it necessary to introduce certain topics, not directly relevant to the question at hand, but on the whole, we think that was found to be, as far as possible, confined to the discussion of direct evidence bearing on points in issue, and examined it according to strict method of historic or scientific investigation. We did not start with any preconceived notion in favor of the Arctic theory, nay, it was regarded as highly improbable at first, but by accumulating evidence in its support, we are eventually forced to accept it, and in all probability, the evidence cited in previous videos will, we think, produce the same impression, but the evidence which will now be cited in support of the Arctic theory is of a different character. If the ancestors of the Vedic bards ever lived near the North Pole, the cosmical or meteorological conditions of the place could not have failed to influence the mythology of the people. And if our theory is true, careful examination of Vedic myth ought to disclose facts which cannot be accounted for by any other theory. The probative value of such evidence will manifestly be inferior to that of the direct evidence previously cited, for myths and legends are variously explained by different scholars. Thus, Yashka mentions 3 or 4 different schools of interpretation, each of which trying to explain the nature and character of the Vedic deities in a different way. One of these schools would have us believe that many of the deities were real historic personages who were subsequently apotheosized for their supernatural virtues or exploits. Other theologians divide the deities into those which have been raised to the divine rank by their own deeds and those which were divine by birth, while the etymologists maintain Vedic deities represent certain cosmical and physical phenomena such as the appearance of the dawn or the breaking up of storm clouds by lightning. The Adhyatmikas, on the other hand, try to explain certain Vedic passages in their own philosophical way, and there are others who endeavor to explain Vedic myths in other different ways. But this is not the place where the relative merits of these different schools can be discussed or examined. We only wish to point out that those who explain the Vedic myths on the supposition that they represent directly or allegorically ethical, historical, or philosophical facts are not likely to accept any inference based on the theory that interprets the Vedic myths as referring to certain cosmical and physical phenomenon. It is for this reason we have reserved the discussion for the mythological evidence of consideration in a separate set of videos after all the evidence directly bearing on the subject has been examined. The evidence which proves the existence of a long continuous dawn or long continuous day or night is not affected by the different theories regarding the interpretation of the Vedic myths and may therefore be termed what the lawyers call direct. But in that case of mythological evidence, only those who accept the etymological method of interpretation will admit the validity of any inference based on the consideration of these myths. It is true that the etymological school of interpretation dates from ancient times, and that modern scholars have accepted the method almost without reserve, although they might differ from the ancients, like Yeska, in the details of the explanation suggested by them. But still, when a new theory is to be established, we thought it safer to separate the mythological from the direct evidence bearing upon the points at issue, even when the 2 lines of investigation seem to converge towards the same point. Now that it has been recorded by Yeska that the etymologists explain most of the Vedic legends on the theory that they represent either the daily triumph of light over darkness or the conquest of the storm god over the dark clouds that imprison the fertilizing waters and the light of the sun. Thus, When the Ashvins are said to have rescued a quail from the jaws of a wolf, Yeshka interprets the legend to mean the release and bringing out of the dawn or light from the darkness of night. His explanation of the character of Vitra is another instance in point. Speaking of the nature of the demon, he refers to the opinions of the different schools. Who was Vitra? A cloud, say the Narutkas, and Ashura, son of Tushvati, say the Adyashkas. The fall of rain arises from the mingling of water and light. This is figuratively depicted as a conflict. The hymns and the Brahmanas describe Vitra as a serpent. By the expansion of his body, he blocked up the streams. When he was destroyed, water flowed forth. The storm and the dawn theories thus form the basis of the Narutka school of interpretation, and though Western scholars have improved upon it, yet the credit of it suggesting this method of interpretation will always rest with the ancient Narutkas, who, as observed by Professor Max Mueller, had carefully thought out the true character of Vedic gods several centuries before Christian eras. Thus the legend of Prajapati, loving his own daughter, is explained in the Ayaretra Brahmana as referring to the sun running after the dawn, or the heaven above, while Kumarila extends this theory to the case of Indra and Ahilya, which according to him represent the sun and the night. But though the Narukas fully accepted the theory, which explained the Vedic myths as representing cosmical and physical phenomenon, yet, as their knowledge of the physical world was very limited in those days, they were not able to explain every Vedic myth or legend by this method. For example, out of the various legends about the Ashvins, Yeshka could explain only one by the dawn theory, namely that of the quail being rescued from the jaws of the wolf. This defect has now been partially removed by Western scholars who, living in more northern regions, are familiar with the decay of the power of the sun during the cold season, or the eventual triumph of spring over winter, or the restoration of the decayed powers of the sun in summer. This phenomenon has, therefore, been used by them to explain the origin of certain Vedic myths, which have been left unexplained either by dawn or storm theories. Up to now, we have thus three theories for explaining Vedic myth, according to the Narutka school of interpretation, and it's necessary to describe them briefly before we proceed to show how they fail to account for all the incidents in myths and legends in which they're applied. According to the dawn theory, the whole theogony and philosophy of the ancient world is centered around the dawn, the mother of the bright gods, of the sun in his various aspects, of the morning, the day, the spring, herself the brilliant image and visage of immortality. Professor Max Mueller, in his Lectures on the Science of Language, further remarks that the dawn, which to us is merely a beautiful sight, was to the early gazers and thinkers the problem of all problems. It was the unknown land from whence rose every day those bright emblem of divine powers which left in the mind of a man the first impression and intimation of another world, of power above, of order, wisdom. What we simply call sunrise brought before their eyes every day the riddle of all riddles, the riddle of existence. The days of their life sprang from that dark abyss, which every morning seemed distinct with light and life. And again, a new life flashes up every morning before their eyes, and fresh breezes of the dawn reach them like greetings wafted across the golden threshold of the sky from the distant lands beyond the mountains, beyond the clouds, beyond the dawn, beyond the immortal sea which brought us hither. The dawn seemed to them to open golden gates for the sun to pass in triumph. While those gates were open, their eyes and their minds strove in their childish way to pierce beyond the finite world. That silent aspect awakened in the human mind the conception of the infinite, the immortal, the divine, and the names of dawn became naturally the names of higher powers. This is manifestly more poetic than real, but the learned professor explains many Vedic myths on the theory that they are all dawn stories in different garbs. Thus, if Saranyu, who had twins from Vivasvat, ran off from him in the form of a mare, he followed her in the form of a horse. It is nothing but a story of the dawn disappearing at the approach of the sun and producing a pair of day and night. The legend of Surya's marriage with Soma and of Vrishhakyapaya, whose oxen, the morning vapors, were swallowed by Indra, or of Aditi giving birth to the Adityas, again said to be the stories of dawn in different aspects. Saryama crossing the waters to find the cows stolen by Panis is similarly the dawn bringing with her the rays of the morning. And when Urvashi says that she has gone away and Puravavas calls himself the brightest, it is the same dawn flying away from the embrace of the rising sun. In short, the dawn is supposed to have been everything to the ancient people, and a number of legends are explained in this way. Until, at last, the monotonous character of the stories led the learned professor to ask himself the question, is everything the dawn? Is everything the sun? A question which he answers by informing us that so far as his researches were concerned, they had led him again and again to the dawn and the sun as the chief burden of the myths of the ancient race. The dawn here referred to is the daily dawn as we see it in the tropical or temperate zone, or in other words, it is the daily conquest of light over darkness that is here represented by filling the minds of the ancient bards with such awe and fear as to give rise to a variety of myths. It may be easily perceived how this theory will be affected by the discovery that Ushas, or the goddess of the dawn in Rigveda, does not represent the evanescent dawn of the tropics, but is really the long continuous dawn of the polar, circumpolar regions. If the Arctic theory is once established, many of these mythological explanations will have to be entirely rewritten. But the task cannot be undertaken in a work which is devoted solely to the examination of the evidence in support of the theory. The storm theory was originally put forward by the Indian Narutkas as a supplement to the dawn theory, in order to account for myths, to which the latter was obviously inapplicable. The chief legend explained on this theory was that of Indra and Vitra, and the explanation has been accepted almost without reserve by all Western scholars. The word Indra is said to have derived from the same root which yielded Indu, that is, the raindrop, and Vitra is one who covers or encompasses the waters of the rain cloud. Two names being thus explained, everything else was made to harmonize with the storm theory by distorting the phrases if the same could not be naturally interpreted in conformity therewith. Thus, when Indra strikes mountain and delivers the rivers therefrom, the Narutkas understood Parvata to be a storm cloud, and the rivers to be streams of rain. Indra's wielding the thunderbolt is thinly interpreted to mean that he was the god of the thunderstorm, and that thunderstorm implied rain as a matter of course. If the Maruts helped Indra in battle, it was easily explained by the storm theory because thunderstorm or rain was always accompanied by stormy weather. The more difficult point of the legend, which required explanation, was the hemming in or captivating of the waters by Vitra or Ahi. In the case of waters in the clouds, it was easy to imagine they were kept captive in the cloud by the demon of drought. But Rigveda often speaks of Sindhus, or streams, being released by the slaughter of Vitra. The streams or rivers are really represented, as conceived by the advocates of this theory, the rivers of the Punjab. It was rather difficult to understand how they could be described as having been hemmed in or kept captive by Vitra. But the ingenuity of Vedic scholars is quite equal to the occasion, and it was suggested that, as the rivers of India, often entirely dried up in the summer, the god of the rainy season, who called them back to life, could be rightly described as releasing them from the grasp of Vitra. The Indian Narutkas do not appear to have extended the theory any further than this, but in the hands of German mythologians, the storm theory became almost a rival to the dawn theory. Stories like that of Saranyu have been explained by them as referring to the movements of dark storm clouds hovering in the sky. Clouds, storms, rains, lightning, and thunder, observes Professor Kuhn. These were aspects that above all others impresses the imagination of the early Aryans and busied it most in finding terrestrial objects to compare with in their ever-varying aspects. The beholders were at home on Earth, and the things on the Earth were comparatively familiar to them. Even the coming and going of celestial luminaries might often be regarded by them with more composure, because of their regularity, but they could never surcease the feel of the liveliest interest in the most wonderful meteoric changes, so lawless and mysterious in their visitations, which wrought such immediate and palpable effects for good or ill upon the lives and fortunes of the beholders. For this reason, Professor Kuhn thinks that these meteorological phenomena are the principal groundwork of all Indo-European mythologies and superstitions, and in abundance with this creed, Professor Roth explains Saranyu as the dark storm cloud soaring in the space in the beginning of all things, and takes Vivasvat as representing the light of the heavens. The third theory, like the first, is solar in origin and attempts to explain certain Vedic myths on the supposition that they represent the triumph of spring over snow and winter. Yashka and other Indian Naritras lived in regions where the contrast between spring and winter was not so marked as in the countries still further north. It was probably for this reason the vernal theory was not put forward by them to explain Vedic myths. Professor Max Mueller has tried to explain most of the exploits of the Ashvins by this theory in Lectures on the Science of Language. If Ashvins restored Chiyavana to youth, if they protected Atri from heat and darkness, if they rescued Vandana from the pit where he was buried alive, or if they replaced the leg of Vishpala, which she had lost in battle, restored Vijivasha his eyesight, it was simply the sun god, restored to his former glory after the decay of his powers in winter. In short, the birth of the vernal sun, his fight against the army of winter, his final victory at the beginning of spring, is, on this theory, the true key to the explanation of many of the myths where the sun god is represented as dying, decaying, or undergoing some other affliction. As contrasted by the dawn theory, the physical phenomena here referred to are annual, but both are solar theories and as such may be contrasted with the storm theory, which is meteorological in origin. And besides these three theories, the dawn, the storm, and the vernal, Mr. Narayana Iyengar of Bangalore has attempted to explain a number of Vedic myths on the hypothesis that they refer to Orion and Aldebaran. These may be called astral theory as distinguished from the others, but all these theories cannot be discussed in this place, nor is it necessary to do so, so far as our purpose is concerned. We wish only to show that, in spite of the various theories started to explain Vedic myths, a number of incidents and several important legends have yet remained unexplained, and mythologists have either ignored them altogether or pushed them out of the way as insignificant or immaterial. If everything could be explained by dawn or storm theory, we may indeed hesitate to accept a new theory for which there would have been very little scope. But when a number of facts which have yet remained unexplained are satisfactory or appropriately accounted for only by Arctic theory, we shall be perfectly justified in citing these legends as corroborative evidence in support of our new theory. It is from this point of view that we mean to examine some of the important Vedic myths in the following videos. Beginning with the legend of Indra and Vitra, or of captive waters, which is generally believed to have been satisfactorily explained by the storm theory. What do you think of the evidence of the Arctic home in the Vedas? Let us know in the comments down below. Remember to smash that like button.